Change this so instead of looking at myself, I can look at you people. That's more interesting. So, welcome to people in summer from people in winter. But actually, winter's not so bad around here. The sun's shining and it gets quite warm in the day. And in fact, I'm starting to strip down already. Just going to have a second while I kind of look through the screen and see who we, or even better would be to have a looking device. Oh, you've all become much clearer. That was like instant awakening. Did you feel the clarity? Oh, it's fun. There, you've got it. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. Coming back to the real world. Good morning. So perhaps we can just mingle together. Mingle in our togetherness with ever more and greater refinement. And just reminding us all that we could attend this session via Zoom or in the flesh, right? As if we were mindful observers. Right? And we sit on the bank and we watch, we observe the stream of happenings go by. Tarchin opens his mouth and says something. Right? You hear things and the stream keeps streaming by. Right? Or we could approach this session not as being even mindful observers, but of just allowing ourselves to dissolve into the streaming itself and be the stream and come to be more familiar with this streaming, with its ups and downs and ins and outs and blocks and flows. Right? Let's just sit together, mingling. Water poured into water so that these water molecules mingle with those water molecules. Right? And we mingle together in our togetherness with appreciation. if your appreciating is acute, you will recognize that you are actually doing something whilst sitting here doing nothing. And my guess is that a goodly number of you have ceased being the stream and have become the observer. And then you realize this, and then being the observer is the stream, and you're streaming. And then you seemingly forget this, and you're suddenly find yourself on the bank, watching, oh, this is a nice stream. That's kind of a lousy stream. This is one I prefer. This is what I expect to be happening, right? God, this is not what I expect to be happening, right? And there's like an incredible noisiness on the bank. You know, we're busy trying to invest all the time. We have a culture, a commercialized culture of Dharma. We want to invest in good Dharma, so, we get a mortgage from the bank. We invest our interest from the bank, right? And then someday something kind of quite wondrous happens, every once in a while, and sometimes it rarely seems to come about because of our intention. We just seem to kind of suddenly find ourselves fluid. Okay? And before the shock hits us, oh, who am I now? Which then pops us back, straight back up onto the bank, right? Before that happens, there is a moment of something ineffable and wondrous. The sheer fact of existing. And these words that I'm speaking, could be received like pebbles, kind of gently plopped into the kind of ocean of experiencing that you are. And when these pebbles plop into this ocean that you are, it creates ripple effects, right, which expand out. Eventually, maybe they're boundless. Maybe they keep expanding forever. But that's a kind of something that we're not quite able to verify. Okay? But it does seem that way. Okay? So we're just sitting, we're smiling, we're breathing, we're present, we're appreciating. And we're savoring the ripples caused by these pebbles. I take refuge in love and clear seeing. We live courageously in this world of birthing, dying. Our hearts embrace all companions on this path of lucidity and freedom. For the sake of all beings, wisdom, compassion, non-clinging awareness, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. midstream of 3 sessions on this topic, right, of the challenges and the opportunities of aging and approaching death. And our last session was a little bit unusual in the sense that I didn't speak non-stop for the entire time, that many people participated and offered insights and understandings and kind of revelations, in a sense, personal revelations of what's deeply meaningful. And I was reflecting on this, and I said this week we would look at some of the challenges, particularly focusing on the challenges. And I was contemplating the last few days leading up to today, how on earth to approach this. And I've come to the conclusion that I don't know. I don't know how to approach this. Because, just like this little analogy that I've started our morning with the idea of being on the bank versus being the streaming, just a kind of a distinction there. That there's a world of difference between theoretical discussion about what one should or shouldn't do, or what one could or couldn't do, and the actual realities of aging and approaching death smack in your face. They might be the same. Ideally, they could be the same, but quite often they're quite different. And it became very clear that any point will I say, well, we're going to begin by looking at this, or we're going to begin by looking at that. And it's as if somehow these are the things this is what you should start looking at, and then you graduate to looking at this, and then you can graduate to looking at that, right? As if it's a kind of nice, kind of compact, already mapped out program for living. When the kind of shocking and terrifying and exciting fact is that we are living a life that no one in the universe has ever lived before. And actually nobody knows exactly where it's going. And where we have to begin is where we are. You are wasting your time if you try and begin where Tarchin thinks he is or feels he is. Right? Each one of us has to begin where we are. And I would like to, we could spend the whole, and probably it would be fruitful and quite interesting to spend the whole morning as we did last time, with just following the flow of observations and so on, and see what we can explore. But there's just a few ideas I really would like to offer to you, and it's not in the beginning or anything. It's just ideas that I think could be useful. Right? I mean, where do we begin? And there's a very simple verse that I often repeat these days, and it goes like this. And although I'm using the word I, this is, imagine for a moment that you've memorized this verse, and so you can say it equally. Right? I am animate. I am an animal. I am born from life and living, and so, dear friends, are you. Everything we experience reverberates with these truths. Everything we experience reverberates with these truths. And to begin with the fact of our aliveness is a pretty good beginning. I think we could maybe all beginning there. We're beginning with our aliveness, right? We exist in this kind of interbeing, interknowing nature, this kind of dancing of interbeing, interknowing, this collaborative, unfolding universe, right? This animate living that we are. And the hallmark of being an animate creature, a living creature, right? A living creature, is that over the course of our life, and now I'm on the bank speaking, right? Over the course of our life, we change. Now, I don't know if the river changes. I'm not sure if the river changes. The river doesn't change, well, now I'm a river, now I'm not a river. There's always a river, right? But it's somehow a kind of intra-changing river, like internal. There's constant changing, right, in the river, right? But when we stand on the bank, we could say, oh, well, I was once a baby. Right? How amazing, right? We got a lovely email, very short email from our friend Alma Ray in Christchurch, and she signed it Besotted Alma, right? And it was a picture of her holding her first grandson. Right? It's kind of like, oh, and I was struck. And there's a picture of her, picture of the father as well holding the child. And it was like difficult not to kind of look at this picture and also share in her besottedness, right? There's something like extraordinarily, and he's so small, you can all wrapped up, fresh. It's not like how many months old. We're talking about how many minutes old, right? It's like really, right? I was once a baby, and it's like quite different from just 3 years later. Baby's gone, right? And there's kind of child learning to run around and learning to talk and getting into trouble and learning to say no. Right? Or whatever kind of phase or stage that the child is in. Fantastic. Right? And then there's the kind of, exciting adolescent, I mean, lots of us were trialing drugs in our adolescence. Remember that? You people out there, I kind of know, we were trying all kinds of drugs, right? I would put it to you that adolescence is an arbitrary, automatic, non-negotiable drug phase. Every adolescent is on drugs. Hormones. Right? Hormones that weren't there in that proportion before are suddenly there, spilling all over the lot. Right? And our body's changing, and we kind of, our voice suddenly goes down, or something, and we got all these kind of, some days it's sort of like this, some days like this. You kind of look very carefully if you're a male to see if you got any little bit of hairy growths on your cheek or something like that, and oh, look at this, and you get pimples, acne, right? And you become self-conscious, okay? And then, there was a time when I was an adolescent, but I'm not an adolescent anymore. Then I became a kind of young, striving, kind of bravado-filled but lacking in confidence adult. You're trying to fake it that you're really an adult. You don't really believe you're an adult. You're hoping other people will treat you like an adult. You're supposed to be adult-like, but it hasn't quite happened yet. And this is a very different phase, right? And so on, until we get to old geezerhood, where many of us are today, right? This is very obvious. But part of being animate, this is inescapably part of being animate. Can you imagine, like, I am an animate, but I never went through phases of life development, right? That I am an animate, but I did it entirely on my own, and it was irrelevant whether I was interbeing or there were interbeings of chemistry or interbeings of cells or interbeings of organisms or interbeings of families and societies, right? None of that I just didn't do that kind of stuff. I was just dwelling in renunciation, right? Did it all on my own. Mm-hmm. Being animate means automatically, right, this kind of responsive relational living. And with responsive relational living, there is again a truth which is with us all the way through, and it's with us today. And if it's with us today, we could all begin with this, right? That part of being animate and being an animal is having skills in picking up and letting go. Right? I mean, I'm putting this in an incredibly simple way, right? We're kind of picking up new experience. Oh, now I'm this, and letting go. And actually, this is a massive challenge, right? We don't always, in fact, we rarely master the art of this. We find we pick up, and then we don't want to let go, or we can't let go, right? And we're scared to pick up, right? Because we're so busy hanging on to this that we don't have our hands open for that. This kind of vague memory. I can't remember if it was a movie somebody told me or I actually saw it. Or do you know how memories work like this, right? And there was a kid at Christmas time, and they were holding all their presents and everything, and they had it all, and they're like, oh, "This is all mine." This is a kind of what a defilement, eh? A child, it shouldn't be like that, says the Buddhist parents, right? No, this is totally natural, ordinary kind of phase that we live in, right? And the kids holding on to all of this, right? And they're just like riddled with kind of pride and possessiveness, and this is my brothers and sisters. You got a little tiny box over there, look what I got, And then all of a sudden, one of the adults points out another present on the tree with their name on it. And they're in this dilemma because they can't possibly reach out and get it without dropping what they've got. And I think I actually saw this once, because I remember it was like I'm saying, well, maybe I read about it or someone told me, but my actual sense is that I saw this, and it was such a simple little innocent moment, but it seemed incredibly profound to me. And then there was this kind of dilemma. You could see it written on this young child's face, like, what am I going to do? And then he or she dropped the whole pile of goodies and went for the one on the tree. Right? Letting go and picking up. And we how could this be a skill that's necessary for good living? Like, is it possible to get through life without letting go and picking up and letting go? Okay. Sometimes people have come to me and said, can I tell you about a meditation experience that I had? So I said, yeah, right? Expecting that I'm hearing, what happened yesterday or this morning, or right? And they go, oh, there was this and this and this and this and this happened and this happened and this happened, and I don't know what to do with it. And something moves me to saying, well, when did that take place? And it took place 5 years ago. Right? It's like they haven't let go. They haven't let go. And you see, part of we're aging all the way through. The infant is aging. Right? And my oncologist said, look, you could be run over by a bus after you walk out of the appointment with me, right? You're not necessarily going to die because of cancer, right? This is a reality, right? So we're kind of, and you don't know, but in a sense, every step in time is approaching death. So children are actually manifestations of aging and approaching death. Okay? Except that in a kind of more conventional way, if there's no sort of serious accidents and so on, there's a statistical possibility, likelihood, that you might actually go long, it might be a while before the death part happens. But then you come to a point where you realize that actually one of the differences between childhood and now is that actually then it seemed like death was a long way away. And now it seems like death could possibly be a titch closer. Okay? It's kind of slightly more in your face. Okay? And not only that, but you know, we not only are we facing our own death, but what makes it very confusing and really muddling is we're also finding our friends die. And people close to us, and people who've been important to us, and our pets die. And other beings and living creatures and so on that are important to us die. Okay? And we find ourselves, in a sense, caught with this kind of incapacity for letting go and picking up. Okay? And I'd like to just emphasize this by reading the verse that I read last time. I think some of these verses bear thinking about more than once. Okay. Life is a boundless matrix of dynamic relating. Ultimately, every action reverberates throughout the universe. I responding to you, you responding to me, this responding to that, that responding to this. Smiling and breathing, enter this contemplation. Responsiveness is the living heart of being and becoming. All dimensions, atoms, molecules, organs and organisms, families and societies, entire ecosystems, biospheres, planets and galaxies, all shifting, responding, constantly changing. Each birthing of this is a dying of that. Each dying of that is a birthing of this. Responsive dancing is the very nature and fabric of what is. Permanence, durability is a mental abstraction. Breathing with this deeply. Suffering arises through trying to fix or make permanent what is essentially a seamless, fluid process. May we cease grasping at permanence and with heartful confidence, with love, with enthusiasm, with wide awake sensitivity, with all these qualities, may we enter fully the great birthing, dying matrix of responsive relating. Dive right in. This ineffable, unpindownable present suchness of now. Contemplating thus, smiling, breathing, present, appreciating, offering. Can you speak as clearly and as succinctly as you can? Because some people were asking last time on the DVD that they couldn't hear some of the people speaking. And just by the way, for those of you who are on video, and if you are looking at the recording later of this, hopefully Stephen, when he gets back to New Zealand, he's going to help to render these high resolution recordings, and at which point we'll post them up on YouTube. And I know it will be easier to hear the contributions from the others in the room. Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, I'll speak as clearly as I can. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak my mind right at the moment. I was awake in the night, didn't sleep well, and contemplated and anticipating today's class. And I reflected on all the corpses that I've been with, many, and the reasons, the causes of death: chromosomal abnormality, baby having a heartbeat 40 beats a minute, living 20 minutes, well, being there with the heartbeat passing, becoming inanimate, not responding, the heart stopping with the brothers, 1 minute animate with breath and then the corpse not responding. Although there's change in the corpse, and I've observed that too, and in the mouse and in the bird. And then what you were just saying then about picking up and letting go, in my experience, there's still responding to the corpse. I'm still relating either to the corpse, or when the corpse is physically gone, to the memory of, to the effect of that person being on me. So there is letting go, and not letting go is still responding. It's still part of my living experience, the absence of, the death of. And it was just, I wanted to talk about that today, and it seemed to key into what you've just been talking about, because
I think so.
Because a part of me goes, oh, I'm failing, I'm not letting go, I'm not, I'm still engaging with the memory of my brother, the effect of my brother, whoever it might be.
Can I, this is
yes.
truly what I want to address today.
Okay, thank you.
When this period, sort of following obvious loss, we call a period of grieving. Right? And we even sort of recognize this by allowing in law sometimes little bits of time for people to have kind of grief leave or something like that. I need to approach this in a kind of broad way, because it's not a simple little thing. I think that grieving actually is an essential tool for being a fully participating human being. And it's something which we don't understand it often. We look at it as being really, grief is just sort of when you're not involved with it, when it's not in your face real, when you're just seeing it in other people, it seems to be sort of like this messy period of dysfunction due to expressions of sorrow and sadness and stuff like that. Right? But I'd like to approach this in a much broader way. Right? I want you to imagine for a moment that you don't have to imagine this. I want you to consider your life as having a kind of inertia of expectation and understanding. Right? We are filled with expectations. We're absolutely filled with expectations. Right? Tomorrow I'm going to drive Mary to her medical appointment or something like that. This is an expectation I have. But of course, she might die before then, or I might die before then. Right? I mean, it's quite normal to have expectations. It's part of my day. I kind of expect that this session will come to an end, and all you people will be left, and this afternoon gone, and I might go for a walk in the Kaimai. It's not an expectation like, oh, I'm going to do it. It's this kind of it's an invisible kind of assumption, expectation of a kind of a flow that when that famous Celtic or Irish prayer, like the ground may rise to meet my step. It's like it's an expectation, right? And there's a kind of a flow of physical expectations. You expect when you open your eyes in the day to see something. If you open your eyes in the day and you just get black, you're off to the optometrist lickety-split, right? Something's really not right. But we don't think, I expect to see. It's just part of, there's a whole feeling of an ambience. I am a kind of a configuration of abilities and expectations. Strangely, I'm talking about not just kind of emotional or psychological expectations. These are kind of physiological expectations. I throw my foot out in front of me as I clomp down the hills in the Kaimai, fully expecting that my boot will hit the ground and and I won't fall flat on my face. Occasionally I've fallen flat on my face because the ground's been like extraordinarily slippery or something, and somehow the angle wasn't quite right, and right. So your expectations, occasionally it's revealed that we're living continuously with expectations, and we're refining our expectations as we go. We're kind of letting go of a whole set of expectations, and we're picking up a whole set of expectations, a whole new set of possible expectations. And imagine for a moment that the letting go and the picking up isn't something that's let go, pick up, but it can take a long time to let go. And it can take a long time to pick up. Have you ever tried to kind of memorize a poem or something? Or kind of learn a kind of new fingering on the guitar, and you gotta do it again, you do it again, you do it again, and then it just that seems to be impossible to pick it up, right? Seems as I get older, my experience in letting go and picking up is kind of different. It seems like young children can let go and pick up fantastically quickly, right? And we get more stodgy, right, with this. So imagine like there's a kind of a matrix of inter-knowing relationships, a matrix of relating. Imagine a kind of incredibly complicated three-dimensional spider web, four-dimensional spider web, like you sometimes you see these, not an orb weaver where you get a flat two-dimensional network, but it's kind of like a tent. And it's not a tent because it's all through the middle too. It's kind of solid. It's kind of a chaotic web, and it's kind of there, and it's taken time. There's kind of patterns of expectation at the molecular level. That when this molecule meets that molecule, there'll be a kind of a release of energy or a release of a particular ion or or a gripping of a particular ion. You know, there's kind of like there's threads of relationship. You know, a relationship is a vehicle. It's not kind of, it doesn't say relation, it's relationship. It could be a relation car, I guess, or a relation plane, right? But it's just plain relation, right? But it's a relationship, right? And so if the ship was, it doesn't sort of float you. You can't sort of float in your ship and go somewhere. If the thing is just so transient, it's just disappearing instantly. You're just suddenly in the ocean. The ship is a kind of a little bit of a thin layer, a veneer between you and the rest of the ocean. Right? There's kind of a certain buoyancy. There's all sorts of juicy, useful puns in this for meditators. Right? It's kind of a neutral buoyancy, a kind of like hovering in this web. And then an image which I find very useful, but I hope it's not too boring and repetitive for some of you, right? Is to bring to mind the ikat weaving of Indonesia, and Guatemala has the same kind of art, and in that weaving, which is extraordinary, it takes amazing skill. They'll take the thread and they'll dye sections of thread, you know, with the color. And then they weave it on the loom, back and forth and back and forth. And as it goes back and forth, what emerges is a bird in a tree. Unbelievable. You know, all you see is a lot of, you know, like there's 3 inches of red, and then there's 2 inches of white, and then there's 2.5 inches of this. And imagine the skill of thinking this out beforehand, you know, to have this, right? And the bird only exists as long as the threads are in place. If you change the threads, like you've got this relationship with your mother, this relationship with your brother, this relationship with your friend, this relationship with your client, this relationship with your teacher, this relationship with your lover, this relationship with, you know, like all these kinds of different things. And meanwhile, the me-ness is a kind of hovering, constantly adjusting within this. And there's a kind of a familiarity of this. There's a feeling of being you. You know, there's certain quality, you know, imagine for a moment you're like a totally uptight person. And then for a moment, everything relaxes and you totally freak out. Right? Something's wrong with me. You know, everything that was this familiarity has kind of gone. And you find yourself grasping after something. And we have a kind of a familiarity of certain textures of how you hold your head, and how you use your eyes, and how you digest your food, right? And how you tend to relate to newness, and how you relate to challenge, and how you relate to loss, right? And all these kinds of things. And the whole thing is like a single bird hovering in a weaving. And this is the image of the weaving and the spiderweb ikat, multidimensional, right? Breaks down is that actually each thread is itself a relating between other beings who are themselves weavings. So I'm in relationship with a bunch of people that are totally out of control. I commit myself to a relationship with you beings, right? Knowing full well that none of you are in control. Now, I don't know what that does with my expectations. But I might have an expectation of not having an expectation, right? It doesn't work, right? Now, I want you, you know, have a sense of like there's an inertia to this. Because it's not fixed. You're not like a bird on a weaving, fixed, right? It's kind of growing and changing as the interbeingness, me, you, us, other, atoms, molecules, biospheres, right? All these things, all these threads are shifting and changing. And then imagine for a moment, right, that it seems like all of a sudden one major thread is cut. Right? Your relationship with this person, cut. They die. One moment they're alive, next moment they're a corpse. Right? Snip! And suddenly the whole of your being sags. Because that part, that kind of living participant in the relationship that you are is no longer there. And so in a sense, like this kind of familiarity has died. I'm not talking about the objective person. I'm talking about the feeling of this. And you find yourself suddenly lost in unfamiliar territory. You don't quite know who you are. You don't quite know what you're supposed to do. You don't know anything. And that not knowing can feel frightening. Right? And sometimes we're stunned by it. Right? Grieving is not just sorrow. Sometimes it's anger. It involves anger. Sometimes it involves self-righteous justification. Sometimes it involves just being kind of stunned mullet. Nothing happening. You know, it's like you don't seem kind of empty, gone, like it's just totally. And there's a period there when an important, like obviously threads are being cut continuously all the way through our life. But like, for example, you know, I don't consider this, I don't really take this on board and bemoan this or beat myself up for it. But I'm sure right at this moment there are all kinds of people who are dying in the Ukraine in bomb rained down, flood filled horror, right? But actually, I'm talking here enthusiastically with you. I'm not thrown into a state of utter dysfunction. And yet I know that that is there. It is part of this. It's part of the web and the weaving, the knowledge of this, and even just the fact of this is the knowledge is the fact. Is part of my living. But it's different when it's closer to home, so to speak. Just speaking very ordinarily. So it's this person in front of you, this being in front of you, this being who you have a deep relationship with, right? I mean, it's a little bit closer when Alma sends the picture of her grandson, and I can feel little sort of tweaks of besottedness in myself as I look at the picture and read her besotted email. Right? I was going to look that up. I wonder what sotted means. I'm kind of curious as to this. Right? It's kind of something is miraculous happening at birth. Suddenly, some being is born, and the parents have their child, right? Birth the child, and it suddenly dawns stronger than ever before that their life is now totally different. Mm-hmm. Right? It's like a major, it wasn't really. Did something get cut? Actually, the besottedness overwhelms the loss of all that freedom you had before the kid came along, and you have to slave away and get all this money to put them through schooling and worry about them and all that kind of stuff. Right? There's the besotted stage is something different. But why? We don't actually. We're not usually grieving our losses, right, when it's around the birth. And we're kind of not really celebrating our gains when it's around the death. We're not besotted around the dying part, right? And yet the grieving, I want you to imagine for a moment that, here's this edifice. It's like think of all the tent. You got a tent that's held up with virtually no poles. It's just kind of guy wires that are kind of pulling against each other. And by the kind of together tension, it appears to stand up in space. You cut one of those guy wires, and suddenly the whole thing sags it's not just an emotional thing. Your digestion goes off. Your eyesight gets funny. Your eyes water. Your pores change their activity. Your skin galvanic response changes. Right? Like, it's like the whole edifice, every single part has to find a new adjustment. And there is a period of time for the human, for the animate organism, for humans, it seems to be quite a long period. Right? I mean, it's quite extraordinary to watch farm animals or something like this and see the period of grieving for farm animals seems to be a lot shorter. Right? Not that they don't grieve, not that they're not terribly upset when their babies are taken away or whatever, right? But the next thing you know, there's corpses on the ground, they just kind of sniff at it and go on munching the grass. Right? It's kind of gone. Right? Now, but humans, we kind of, our very nature, our human nature, with memory, with powerful investment in familiarity, right? Familiar family, right? If they're really a stranger, we don't grieve them so much as if they seem to be closer to family. If they're a friend, well, he's sort of part of the family, right? If they're kind of utter stranger I've never even heard about, they're not part of the family at all, right? So there was no familiarity that got changed. Right? And so the period that we call grieving, I think of the period of grieving is the period that takes for the being to slowly, like maybe there's a catastrophe and you feel like everything's gone, everything's fallen apart. But slowly, after a week, after a month, after a year, after 10 years, there's no fixed schedule on this, right? You begin to realize that actually the whole web didn't just fall out into the void and vanish. It's now there, and it's got new possibilities, and we start to become familiarized and learn to be kind of, okay, we can make a life out of this. And that period of time I think of as a period of grieving. And it's not negotiable for creatures, animal creatures like humans. It's not merely a messy bit of sorrow that you kind of put up with, and poor, This is serious life work. Grieving is living work. It's not something we do, only on special occasions. Right? As a Dharma practitioner, we should be masters of grieving, of picking up and letting go. Right? Of the kind of emptiness, unpin-downable, ungraspable mystery of interbeingness. Right? It's kind of nothing there, just the flow. And compassion. This being, that being, this texture, that one. It's just like we're working with this kind of non-clinging. Right? And you see, the thing is that grieving is not just something, when you sag, other living beings who are still part of the network, that you are part of their network, and they sag. So, what is death anyway? In the Abhidhamma, the death is sometimes defined as a temporary end of a temporary phenomena. Right? That's very sort of dry, right? And it could lead to all kinds of assumptions of, and then it's a temporary end, and then you get reborn as such and such, and you start all over again. But that's not necessarily what Abhidhamma is pointing to at all. There's just continuous temporary endings of temporary phenomena. And they might as well say it's a temporary beginning of a temporary beginning phenomena. Right? But you're not quite sure what it is. The new beginning is unfamiliar. Right? The child is becoming familiar with boundaries and what they can do as a child in the family, in the life situation they find themselves. The adolescent is trying to become more familiar, and then when things don't work out the way we think, our expectations aren't there, aren't met, right? Then we get into a kind of little mini grief. Grief not as sorrow, grief as the confusion, not knowing who I am and what I'm doing-ness. Until I know who I am again, you don't really, right? But there's a sense of being kind of together, this kind of new being, enriched by these experiences of letting go, letting be. I jotted down a few things, and did you wake up in the middle of the night?
Yes, a lot.
Really? What time were you really bothered?
Probably between midnight and 3 o'clock.
Oh yeah, it was exactly when I was writing all this down. I'm joking, but actually it's fact. Right? I mean, the failed expectation can lead to sadness, it can lead to depression. What does it lead to? Could failed expectation lead to humor? Could it lead to patience? Could it lead to wisdom? We have expectation, for example,
and failed expectations lead to depression.
Sorry, Paul? Did you say that again?
Sorry. It's okay.
Okay. Right?
I think he said it could lead to depression.
Yeah. Exactly. And so think of like expectations that we might have in the process of aging. We have expectations, for example, about physical balance and coordination. And all of a sudden your hand jerks or something. It's like, oh, that didn't used to do that. Or you trip or you stumble or you kind of, and then you feel like you're losing something. We have expectation of physical capacity. Right? Oh, I can turn the compost in a day. I can do that. And now I can go, I think I can turn it in a week. And I'm totally knackered, right? It's excuse me. We have kind of the expectation, familiarities, which we then we become so familiar with it that we, in a sense, strangers are interesting. Family isn't. Because familiarity also breeds contempt. Right? It's, oh yeah, I know that person. But actually, could we live with family without being familiar? Right? And so we have kind of expectation of memory. We have expectations that our memory, what was that I was going to say? Who was that? And, pop, 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 the memory starts to fail. This doesn't happen just with people who have neatly diagnosed conditions. I'll confess to you, you probably want to go out and find somebody else to come and relate to on Sunday, but it happens to me. It's kind of, right? Big hole in the fabric of what was supposed to come next. What was it I was talking about? We live with these expectations. You expect the flow to come out, and then it doesn't. Right? You have expectation of having certain skills. Right? And then you realize that you're not really so good at that anymore. It's just not then, and doesn't have the same interest or the same kind of thing. We have expectations of religious expectations. We have expectations of shoulds and oughts. that we ought to be caring, or we ought to be more non-clinging, or we ought to be more mindful, right? Okay? We have expectations that somehow, if I just, that somehow Dharma is really a matter of technique. And that if I did these meditations and if I did these practices, then everything would be hunky-dory. You imagine the whole of the universe looking down on this little pipsqueak Dharma yogi, right? Who's going, well, if I just do these practices and everything, and then I'll have wisdom, compassion, and non-clinging awareness. It's almost like, meanwhile, the whole universe, which is this kind of little expression of unique, wondrous, naive expectation, is part and process of the universe's beingness, the body of the universe, right? It's going, well, just enjoy. Right? But when you're right in it, right? So, we could say that unconscious expectations is a kind of abdication of mindfulness. Unconscious expectations, assumptions, right? When you're young, you can afford assumptions because there's a good probability that there's some time to learn from your mistakes. When you get older, our mistakes sometimes become more critical, right? Oh, I shouldn't have done that operation. It's too late, right? Or I wish I had done that operation, right? It seems to be a little bit more critical. Okay? And so we have kind of abdication of, if we think of mindfulness of kind of lucid, fully engaged, non-clinging presence, right? And so what is it that we're letting go? Who dies? Stephen Levine titled one of his wonderful books, right? Who ages? We could say that, aging and approaching death in a conventional way, grey hairs and all that kind of stuff, decades of experience, right, is a kind of PhD Dharma course, right? I mean, or it's not even PhD Dharma course, it's post-PhD, it's postgraduate, right? And up until now, Dharma has been just a lovely interest of mine. And then I got these other things I have to do. I have to go to work and so on. But I'm really interested in Dharma and practicing and so on. And it's just kind of like a thing, a little bauble. You kind of play with it. You learn to juggle it really well. You can do all kinds of things. But, and sometimes it's even useful. Oh, fantastic. It was useful, It's like a kind of... But, sometimes it's not. It's just kind of like entertaining. I wonder how consciousness works and it all sort of, how does this interbeing work? And it's very interesting, right? And then suddenly you meet with death. You meet with old age. You meet with grieving big time in your face, right? What about the loss of your youthfulness, right? The loss of your, can you, there was a period of time, I confess to you, there was a period of time, because it's been a long journey now, 8 years, cancer journey for me, and where at the very early stages, I had a big operation, big surgery, and I was thinking, well, maybe then I can recover from this surgery and I can get back to sort of being the being that I was and kind of living that life. And it kind of slowly dawned on me that I'd have to be the being that I was with semi-incontinence. So this is already not quite the being that I was. Kind of put awkwardnesses into moments. Right? And then it gradually started to dawn on me that this was kind of like a a fantastic assumption which I was walking around with, the assumption that somehow there was a real life that I would get healed and get back to. You know, you're going to get over your grief, right? And get back to a proper full life. No. The way I'm speaking about it, you might have a sense that the whole process of grieving is woven into the very fabric of your life. It never goes away. But it doesn't mean sorrow and sadness all the time. Can be, we're talking about, these are the challenges to do this. It's also huge opportunities. Okay? We'll emphasize that next week. Okay? You know, it's like, can I somehow encourage the possibility of meeting this utter state of dysfunction with kindness and interest? And that means that, you know, if I'm with someone who is grieving, can I somehow be with them in a way that honors the kind of profound necessity and like miraculous animate reality that's taking place, this process that's taking place, and not try to kind of hurry them or solve their problems, or as if somehow grief was an illness that you can get over. That it was it's not, it's living. You're not pathologically kind of damaged, right? Because you grieve. You're animate. You're an animal. You're born from and in life and living, and so, dear friends, are everybody else. Everything we experience reverberates with this truth. So, you know, in a sense, like, grieving is like inevitable work for the human being. And you might say possibly part of the face of eldership is to actually be able to kind of model for others greater skill in grieving. You know, imagine, you know, it's a strange way possibly of looking at this. We could be talking about enlightenment and liberation and go beyond all that. But it's like I think of old age, decay and death, not as a, you know, meditated on. I can remember doing deep retreats in the forests of Canada, right, on death and impermanence and so on, profound retreats and so on. It's like completely different than today, right? And you come to a point where it's like kind of in your face. And you know, even your own death is still not quite in your face, but when someone close to you dies, and especially if you're right there with their corpse, this is as in your face as it gets, right? And the sense of realizing, is there something wrong with the person because a major kind of interbeing thread in their life was cut, and there's a sagging of the edifice. You know, everything changes its shape, you know, when you just take that one thing out. In fact, there's snips happening all the time, and we're kind of moving like this, but some of them are major ones, right? And then you know, the being's still alive. And it doesn't help the grieving person to say, you're still alive, come on, smile, life's good, you know, get on with it, you know, you can do, it's all close, smell the flowers. Right? As if somehow there was some simple little technique. We live our way through this, but we can live our way through this with aspiration to honor this kind of life experience, this living experience, which all of us are in. To when I say honor it, I mean, you know, in a sense, we take it seriously. We give it the time it needs. How many years of grieving until you don't really think of it as grief anymore. It's still there, but you don't really call it that anymore. Right? It's morphed into something else, and there's a kind of a new configuration enriched by that being together and the parting, right? Which in a sense leads, this is your offering. And we see that the fundamental problem is the letting go. And at the beginning we think, as your question kind of might have been heard, you know, the letting go is something you kind of, well, you let go, but I'm not letting go yet, but I should let go. You know, it's a kind of a something that can be done, and it's got a boundary and it's completed or it's not, right? But actually letting go, slow skill in letting go gradually morphs from letting go, which is kind of a negative, not holding on. At what point does letting go become giving? You know, and part of the aging process is, you know, was it Kubler-Ross who did such extraordinary pioneer work on death and dying in Western cultures. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, many of you will have come across her books. There was a time when everyone had read her books. Now nobody's heard of her because we've kind of moved on from there, right? But she talked about, you know, this kind of late life stage of unfinished business. That a lot of the problem of grieving and a lot of the problem of being with impermanence is the fact that we carry around unfinished business. Okay? And sometimes at this stage, you know, we have to we go, well, what can I do? Well, what I could begin to do is, instead of letting go, I could pre-give. It's called forgive. And sometimes we need to forgive others for perceived harm that we feel they've done to us. And sometimes we have to forgive ourselves for the harm that we did to others. Right? You know, it's like I think of to forgive is not to, you know, you've been kind of injured, you've been offended, you've been hurt, right? And you have this response against whatever it is that's hurting you. I don't like it. Take the pain away, right? And it's like a aggression, right? And we say, well, let go of that. Let go of that. And how do I let go of that? Well, I'm not letting go until they apologize. Right? Bloody well not. It's their fault. They've got to apologize. Right? They may be blithely going off having a great life. Right? You're still clinging to this, hanging on to all this. Right? So you don't wait for them to give you an apology. You give first. You forgive. I think the practice of forgiveness is to not wait for the kind of other party to admit they're wrong or anything like that. But never mind, you proactively come back into the flow of giving. And you're giving, what do you give? You can give your attention, your attentiveness. Right? You can give your presence. Right? This is forgiveness. And you can do, Stephen Levine outlined some wonderful, quite pragmatic, detailed, do this in forgiveness meditations. Right? Sometimes, you know, you need to kind of feel deeply into yourself and you realize there's things you're ashamed of. And you need to, this affects, you can't let go because it's all tied up. It was like, you didn't quite finish this business when they were alive, and then they die, and you don't know what to do. You're stuck with it now because you can't ever go and apologize to them because they're dead. Okay? And so, you know, this coming into forgiving, and then forgiving kind of flowers itself, like the letting go morphs into forgiving, and the forgiving morphs into kind of spontaneous, a kind of mind of spontaneous generosity. Okay? It morphs. These are not techniques. It starts off, right? We could have the aspiration for this. Right? And to be, in a sense, we have little deaths on the way to death. I think it takes a long time to die. Right? It takes a long, it's sort of picking up in slow motion, letting go in slow motion. It's like treacle sometimes, right? But it's kind of because this is the kind of, I am a holding on and a letting go at the same time. And there's a kind of inertia of an overall feeling of this. It's me. Right? I've kind of outlined a few ideas which personally I find were really useful when I was kind of started to look at the process of grieving as being inseparable part of living fully and well. Right? That this picking up and letting go, this kind of attempt, right, to complete unfinished business. So it doesn't just drag on and drag on. We can move on, right? We could learn to express appreciation to being. Sometimes the unfinished business is the fact that you never told someone that you loved them. And then they died. Maybe it doesn't sound like a big deal, but for some beings at that moment, that's really big deal, right? That you forgive them, that you ask for forgiveness, that you apologize. These are the kind of, we're kind of tidying up these loose ends so that we can dive, we don't dive into the river. You're on the bank and you're in the river. The beings on the bank don't realize that they are a river itself. So it's more like we surrender into the river. We don't dive in. We surrender into rivering. So I'd like to stop here and just see if there are any thoughts or questions or particular areas you'd like to look at in slightly more detail. There's so many things that this is the whole of Dharma. There's so much that can be said. There are some specific helps, but they're not solved by techniques or specific helps. It's a kind of an attitude, right? And it comes down to, if we can't accept death, we might one day have the miraculous, wondrous thought that goes hand in hand with not accepting living. That death and dying is part of being alive. Jati Marana. We live courageously in this world of birthing, dying. It's kind of funny language because we're not used to talking that way, but I make a point of it. Birthing, dying, birthing. Are there any personal thoughts or observations or sharings or questions that would like to come forward, either from people in the room or from people on the Zoom? And can you help out with this? If there's someone, keep an eye and see if there's someone waving on the Zoom. Carol? Or wave, Carol. Oh, there you are. Can you unmute yourself?
I'm out here somewhere.
Yes, I've now seen a little picture of you.
God, just waving up from the corner. I lost my partner going on 7 years now. And I was very, I didn't really understand what was happening to me afterwards. But I'm finally, I think, putting together, when you think about interbeing is not, you're over there and I'm here. But in as much as we interact, we're there actually isn't a really clear boundary between us. We get confused by the physical boundary, but the actual experiential, interactive reality is very, very connected. So when a person that you've lived with for 35 years dies, it's not just like the loss of them, but you've actually lost this. I mean, I kept saying this, but I didn't understand why or but I see now, like, you really do you lose all of the part of you that was bound together. The interbeing of the two of you is gone. So suddenly you are not you either anymore. So you've lost a huge chunk of yourself, and you don't just suffer the loss, you suffer the loss of your own identity and your own place in the world. So it's more than just the snipping of two bodies. It's actually that the things are completely enmeshed in an energetic and psychic and psychological and every other way other than that physical. So I mean, it's an observation, but it makes so much more sense to me now seeing that.
Yes, yeah.
Like the actual real practicality of it is that you lose chunks of yourself. You lose memory, you lose experience, you lose whatever that shared condition is, goes away. And you can try to rebuild it over time, but it takes time, and you'll never go back. The same thing when you described realizing you'd never be the old self that you were. You realize you can never go back to being the joint you were with that other person.
No. Yeah. So. Good. Yeah, thank you for that observation. Exactly. I mean, there is in a sense, considering this topic, if you like, from the point of view of challenges, then we can look and see, well, what could I do to, within this frame that we're talking about, how can I best participate or do this? Within the realm of opportunities, like to be stimulated to explore further, we might raise the question of who or what we are, what is. We come into the heart of Dharma, and it may be that at that stage there's just a whole different way of engaging with these questions. But today we're particularly looking at this, and I think that it's really just having a sense of how natural and normal and life. It's a facet of being a living organism to experience this and to live through this and learn through this. It's not a defilement. It's not a shortcoming. It's not a kind of mess up. It's just part and parcel. You might as well say, well, okay, if that's the case, I don't want to be animate, and I don't want to be an animal, and I don't want to be a human being with feelings and memory and stuff like that. May I come back as a pebble? may I come back as a rock? May I, you're trying to imagine something that doesn't have these problems. Okay? I don't think that's what we're doing. Okay? But we could raise the question of, are there, when you say get on with it, like haven't you tried a dating app or something? You could find somebody else. There's lots of people around. I'm sure you could have a good relationship. Encourage. Let's go. There's a great movie. You want to go? It'll distract you, right? As if somehow we're helping the person. And so the question that I find myself raising a lot is like, how can I best facilitate an environment for myself and for others to be the fullness of the human animal that they are? Right, living and learning as we go. And so one of the things too is that we can actually honor the space of grieving that the other person is in. Right? It doesn't mean that you don't do anything or you're not interactive, but we become more skilled. And we cease to, our culture pathologizes grief. It's kind of treated as a kind of an unpleasant side effect of reality. And what I'm trying to, it changes the whole thing if we see that this kind of natural, it's natural to being a living creature of an interbeing creature, an inter-knowing matrix, right? As soon as we start talking about it, we talk about two ends on a thread in a relationship. But as you say, Carol, it's not. It's the whole thing is there's just one matrix. Who dies? This is real juicy work. And when you're young, you can approach it optionally, right? And when you are suddenly illness, pain, discomfort, dissociation, death, whatever is smacking your face, it's no longer optional. This Dharma exploration is shoved into your face. Right? I often think to myself, like, thank God for decades and decades of involvement with Dharma, because I don't know how I would have navigated the last few years medically with an absence of all of that, you know. But you can't just, okay, now I'm going to just pick up a whole lot of Dharma and deal with it, like Dharma's some kind of neat little tool or trick or mantra that's going to solve the problem. It's not. It's a living journey.
I was thinking what Anne was saying about the letting go, but for me, I've had someone close who died, but it's almost like but it's tied up with love. Like if I somehow stop, if I let go, then I'll stop, then the love, the memory, and the love is still there. You know, I want to honour that.
Yes.
And so I'm just a little bit confused about what the letting go, what you're letting go.
Well, not only who dies and who ages, but who do you let go? Right? Love is obviously a huge, gigantic dimension in everything we're talking about here. In a kind of very ordinary sense of two people having this extraordinarily close, mysterious, deep, multi-dimensional relationship. But you know, do we love the being that we love to love? Or do we love the fullness of the being? What would it mean for all of me to be present with and for all of you? What would it mean for all of me, the brilliant parts, the confused parts, the dysfunctional parts, the skilled parts, right? To be present with and for all of you with your dysfunction, your skills, your present, you know, like all of this. And when we start to realize it, this work of exploring, let's not take for granted that we know, you know, we have a little sound bite, it's called grief, and it just encapsulates this thing which is huge. Well, it's exactly the same. We have this little sound bite, it's love. And it encapsulates something that's huge. And perhaps it might invite us to go, well, who do I love? And you know, like, what, you know, where does that being, this is more, in a sense, opportunities. This is taking us deep into, deep wisdom work is deep love work. To say, well, I'm totally in love with this, and when I lose the being that I love to love, I've lost my love. But did that have anything to do? It's me. It's all about me. What about them? Did I actually love them? I'm not raising this as a horrible, challenging question here, but it's like as a deep question, right? Could I, just as I might be able to still, in a meaningful way, conjure up the presence of someone who's died and apologize or ask for forgiveness, I could do that, and I could do it in a meaningful way. So too, could I conjure up the presence of a being and look even more deeply into their being and realize, oh, there was more to this being than ever met my eye. Surely, like, if you think you know the being, do you love them? Because, you know, ultimately I think everyone's unknowable because everyone's kind of immeasurable universe in process, right? So there's a kind of an element that's there. What would it mean? You know, we might even transform our sense of what we understand as love, not giving up anything, but expanding it. Okay? I mean, you could have a feeling that, you know, some beings might have a feeling they kind of walk through the environment and, you know, they sense their loved one in the trees and in the flowers and in the earth and in the sky. And you could have even a kind of scientific, intellectual explanation of all that. Well, they're atoms and so on have gone back into the universe and I'm breathing them in and they're always there. And if that supports, if that kind of new familiarity of how to be with the universe supports a greater capacity to see the fullness of the being rather than just only when they're, you know, spit polish, shiny, glowing new, right? Even when all really kind of, you could see, right? We could expand this. And this is Amitabha work. This is the Buddha of immeasurable love and immeasurable light, like understanding, immeasurable understanding. Yeah. Other questions or observations? Yes.
Just a quick one. Just thinking about what Carol just said. At the end of this month, it's the anniversary of my husband's death, and it was 7 years ago. And just returning back to the river, I remember that the whole time before his death felt like a dam. And then all of a sudden he was gone physically, and then just the waters flowed. And so I felt I traversed rapids and waterfalls and sludge ponds, stagnant water. But I have to say, coming into the period I am now, I'm glad I've been on the journey. It hurt a lot. I loved a lot. We loved each other. We respected each other as people, our own lives. And I think I've met a new person. It's very new, but there's a warmth in my relationship with my late husband that I will carry forward, and in every aspect of my life.
Yeah.
So it actually can be beautiful, but you just have to be true to what's happening within you, and not allowing society to dictate how you should feel or behave, because it's individual.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And is there anyone else in Zoom land? Because I'm not paying much attention to the screen, but wave your hand like crazy if there is. Well, perhaps we could just sit together for a moment and let this flow of thinking and feeling and contemplating percolate a little further. Thinking of Mary Oliver's words, when I die, I want to be a bride. I want to be able to say that I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world in my arms. I thought this is a beautiful expression of something which is quite universal yearning for beings, although we don't necessarily admit it in public. For those of you that are not familiar, perhaps I'll just finish by reading her poem for you. when death comes, like the hungry bear in autumn, when death comes and takes all the bright coins from his purse to buy me, and snaps the purse shut, when death comes like the measles pox, when death comes like an iceberg between the shoulder blades, I want to step through the door, full of curiosity, wondering, what is it going to be like, that cottage of darkness, that cottage of not knowing? And therefore, I look upon everything as a brotherhood and a sisterhood. And I look upon time as no more than an idea. And I consider eternity as another possibility. And I think of each life as a flower, as common as a field daisy, and as singular. And each name a comfortable music in the mouth, tending, as all music does, towards silence. And each body a lion of courage and something precious to the earth. And when it's over, I want to say, all my life, I was a bride, married to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world in my arms. My mother's last days, before I actually arrived in Victoria to be with her, I was speaking on the phone and saying, I'm on my way. And she was kind of struggling. And I said, I got a poem I want to read to you. And I read her Mary Oliver's poem. And my mother was a very talky person, quite intellectual. I'm a chip off the old block. And the phone just went silent. No yefs buts, no nothings, right? Just total silence. And I said, are you still there? You know, I wasn't sure if the phone had gone dead or what, you know. And she said it was so moving. And consequently, you know, minutes after we realized that she breathed her last breath in the hospice in Victoria, and I was with her, and I read the poem to her there, and it still jerks my tears. Is the grieving over? Is it a silly question to talk about it being over? Right? Is it wondrous? Yes. Would I, you know, if I could go back and change it all, and would I change it and do something different? No. Next time we come together, in 2 weeks' time, we'll have our third go at this topic. And at that time I'd like to just shift the emphasis a little bit, and rather than kind of looking at it as the challenges, look at terms of the opportunities, which aren't different. The challenge is the opportunity. The opportunity is the challenge. It's totally artificial to kind of divide them up like this. But we could put an emphasis, just slightly shift the way we pronounce it or look at it, and we'll look at that. So thank you all for coming and contemplating with us together. And may we learn this fine and subtle and mysterious art of being animate, of being animals, of being continuously birthed from the process of life and living, anew, and recognizing that all the beings that we interact with, this is true for them as well. May we recognize that all our experience reverberates with these deep and profound truths. Sarvamangalam. 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 Thank you.